Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is one of the best RPGs on the PlayStation 2. It has the best turn-based combat I've experienced in the genre, a chilling yet oddly beautiful atmosphere, and while the main plot is a bit on the simplistic side, it makes up for it with the discussion that can be had with the ideas that are presented. For those who are more frequent viewers of my channel, then this is information that you probably already know since, well, I've talked about Nocturne in the past. And to be honest, it hasn't been long enough since that video for my thoughts to dramatically change. But what I'm here to do today is talk about the newly released HD Remaster of Nocturne that's available for the PS4, Switch, and Steam. Instead of just looking at the game for a second time, I'm actually going to judge this as a product on its own, and answer the question of whether or not it's worth getting. If you're new to my channel and want to hear my full thoughts on Nocturne's mechanics, story, and so on, then you can find my in-depth Nocturne analysis in the description or at the card up top. But be warned, that video contains spoilers for pretty much everything, so proceed with caution. Also, all of the footage you're going to be seeing for this video is strictly from the early game content, so if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on this remaster and don't want to be spoiled, then there you go. But before we get started, there's something I need to make abundantly clear. I was provided with a review copy of this game by Sega and Atlus. I'm very humbled to be given this opportunity to talk about this amazing franchise. However, all thoughts and opinions expressed in this video are purely my own. There is an inherent bias since I'm a massive fan of Megaten, but I always make sure to be honest with myself and you viewers at all times. With that out of the way, let's get started. Throughout my playthrough of Nocturne HD, there was one thought that was wedged in the back of my mind, and it took until I sat down to write this script to really think about what it was. Remember how back in the PS3 era, where PS2 games were re-released in collections with widescreen support, bundles like Devil May Cry HD, the Ratchet & Clank collection, Jack HD, stuff like that? In my opinion, SMT Nocturne HD feels like a port that was supposed to be released in that era, but somehow ended up coming out in 2021. If I were to compare this remaster to the previously mentioned ones, then I think there was a tiny bit more effort placed into this game. However, comparing Nocturne HD to the way developers handle this sort of idea nowadays doesn't do the game any favors. On one hand, we have the faithful recreation of a classic title, but with the visuals of modern standards. The main focus is to be as accurate with the controls and level design as possible, but providing a visual experience that captures how you imagine the game looked when you were younger. Then there's the other end of the spectrum, where old games are remade and reinterpreted as entirely new experiences that are completely separate from the original intention. If we completely disregard the overall quality of these titles and only compare them to Nocturne based on surface level, then you can see the problem. All this would be a different story, however, if Nocturne HD's price point matched what was offered here. Nocturne HD is currently priced at $50 for the base game, and $70 for the version that contains all the DLC. This translates to 66 Canadian dollars and 93 Canadian respectively. That's a pretty steep price to pay right off the bat for a game that was released back in 2003. So let's take a more thorough look to see if this price is at all justified. Obviously, the first thing we should start off with are the visual changes and graphical improvements. The game is now in widescreen and the resolution has been increased to a full HD, at least on the PlayStation 4 and Steam release. The Switch version is another story, but I'll just save my thoughts on that for a bit later. Texture quality has been improved in a lot of areas and the models have been tremendously smoothed out. If we were to just compare how the Demi-Fiend looks in the original version to how he looks now, the difference is night and day. It really goes to show that Nocturne, for the time, was a great looking game in a lot of ways. The game has such a strong artistic vision that can be felt throughout the entire runtime. Something that I was surprised to see was that the lighting engine has been updated. I guess this was done in an attempt to make the game look more modern, but I feel as though this might make the game feel a bit too vibrant at points. Nocturne is a game that relies heavily on its oppressive atmosphere in order to convey the themes of the game. The world has ended, and you're supposed to be playing as one of the few humans that survived, and even then, calling yourself entirely human would be a huge stretch. You wander around these destroyed environments alone, with no knowledge of what may be around each corner. The only things that remain are the destroyed buildings and warped landmarks of Japan to act as a stark reminder of the previous world. This was captured perfectly in the original PS2 version of the game, but I struggle to say it's emulated well in the remaster. The environments are far too bright now, making it feel as though you're walking through a movie set instead of exploring a natural area. I first noticed this in Ikebukuro. The lighting here looks far more artificial, as if there's stage lights overhanging the area instead of natural sunlight shining through the roof. The worst example has to be this scene here inside of the Assembly of Nihilo. The main lighting in this scene should only be the red glow of the Magatsuhi surrounding the area, with a very soft blue light used to accent the characters and give the image much more depth. In the remaster, however, it looks as though the characters are possibly either tinted or lit with a very strong blue light. This just makes the entire area feel less real than what they were going for. It's also far more noticeable here because of the game's resolution, and the fact that it's not being hidden with the lower image quality a CRT provides. I know that this might sound super nitpicky, but I honestly think that this is important to mention. If the idea is to preserve the original vision Nocturne had, I think that changing the lighting to this degree somewhat tramples on that. That's not to say that I think the new lighting is terrible. There's some gorgeous scenes in this game thanks to the new lighting. It's just that I feel very mixed on how it was executed. I'm probably also in the minority of people who does care about this sort of thing, but I just wanted to share my thoughts on the topic. A new addition to Nocturne HD is the inclusion of voice acting. You have the choice between an English or Japanese dub and can switch at any time you want. You can even turn off the voice acting if you so choose. Not every piece of dialogue is voiced, but I really did enjoy the performances. My personal favorites belong to Robbie Daymond as Isamu and Connor Forgarty as Hikawa. While I appreciate the addition of voice acting, Nocturne HD's presentation has a lot of flaws that should have been ironed out. The game's pre-rendered cutscenes are still in their 4:3 aspect ratio and are also rendered in standard definition. A lot of the pre-rendered assets in this game have borders surrounding them to fill up the negative space. In the case of the FMVs, the developers decided to duplicate the video file and blur them in the background. I've seen a lot of HD remasters do this sort of thing, mostly because the developers no longer have access to those files anymore. It personally doesn't bother me that the pre-rendered cutscenes are still in 4:3, but I can see why people would take issue with this. Something that I find incredibly disappointing is that the music in this remaster is still just as compressed as in the original release. Due to the limited space of DVDs, certain cutbacks had to be made in order to fit Nocturne on a single disc. This is why the music quality is borderline terrible in that game. We live in an age where this isn't an issue anymore, so the fact that Nocturne's soundtrack is still compressed this badly just blows my mind. This music is also readily available, so Atlus absolutely has access to the soundtrack. There's already mods for the Japanese version of the game to use the high quality music, and the fact that this wasn't done for this release is something that I can't wrap my head around. But this isn't even the worst issue that Nocturne HD has in my eyes. You see, Nocturne runs at a locked 30 frames per second on the PS2, and this is unchanged for the remaster. This personally didn't bother me, but it's disappointing that it doesn't run at 60 FPS like the PC port of Persona 4 Golden does. Nocturne is probably one of those games that tied some in-game logic to the frame rate, such as random encounters, so maybe too much work would have needed to go into this project to uncap the frame rate. However, the current performance of the remaster is unacceptable. For reference, I played the PS4 version on my PS5 through backwards compatibility. In my experience, the performance issues were almost non-existent, other than one time during Fornius' death animation. Even though I personally had a smooth experience, I can't deny the fact that this remaster is poorly optimized, especially on the Nintendo Switch. From the footage I've seen of the Switch version thanks to some of my friends, I can safely say that you should avoid this version of the game at all costs. The frame rate rarely stays at a consistent 30 FPS and can even drop to the single digits during cutscenes and boss fights. This is unacceptable, especially considering that this is a remaster of a 2003 PS2 game, which I should remind you had no frame rate issues when running on said hardware. The fact that these issues haven't been fixed for the international release of the game is quite frankly embarrassing, and I really hope that this isn't a sign for how SMT5 is going to perform on the system. I personally haven't tested the game out on a regular PS4 yet, but I can only assume that it runs much better than the Switch release. So if you do decide to pick up the game, make sure you do it on PS4 or PC. Okay, that's about all I had to say regarding the presentation. I want to talk about the gameplay differences here really quickly because there are a few additions and changes made here that improve Nocturne's base game. For starters, during Demon Fusion, you can now manually select which skills you want demons to inherit. This is a great addition because it greatly cuts down on time spent in the Cathedral of Shadows, but the option for random skill inherited still exists if you want a more pure experience. You can now change the difficulty at any time in the configuration menu. In the original game, you'd be locked to whatever difficulty you started the game on, meaning that you'd need to make a new save file if you wanted to change your experience. Now you can make the game easier or more difficult on the fly. Not only that, but a third new difficulty option has been added as free DLC. This new mode, on paper, is meant to be the game's beginner mode. Not only do you deal more damage and receive less damage, but enemies become less accurate and you earn more money and experience at the end of battles. Also, I believe the encounter rate is lowered, but don't quote me on that. I honestly think that you should avoid playing on this difficulty at all costs, even if you are a newcomer to the series. Part of what makes Nocturne such a memorable experience is the fact that it legitimately feels like a fight for survival. The difficulty of the game was a deliberate artistic choice in order to put an emphasis on how brutal the Vortex world really was. Plus, Merciful Mode is just far too forgiving of an experience for it to be any fun. Out of curiosity, I fought the first boss in Merciful and gave myself a few handicaps. I would only be allowed to use 3 demons, and the only thing I could do was play the game in rush mode. I ended up beating the boss in no time at all and only received a few scratches on me. Yeah, I think it's best to avoid this mode and just stick with normal on your first playthrough. Nocturne HD is based off the 3rd release of the game titled Nocturne Maniacs Chronicles Edition. In an attempt to do a bit of cross-promotion with the Devil Summoner games, Atlus made a special version of Nocturne that replaced the previous guest character Dante with the young detective Raido Kuzunoha. Other than that and a few other smaller changes, these 2 versions are largely the same. However, if you still really want to have Dante in the game instead of Raido, you're not out of luck because he's being sold as DLC. I find this perfectly understandable because of the licensing fees required in order to have Dante in the game again, plus the cost of paying Ruben Langdon to reprise his role as the Devil Hunter. However, there's some DLC being offered here that I can't quite give a free pass. In case for whatever reason you don't feel like playing the game you just bought, then you can purchase the money and experience grinding bonus maps. Out of curiosity, I tried these out for myself, and they're about as unnecessary as they sound. I mean, the game already includes Merciful Mode if you want an easier experience, and that doesn't cost anything. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, you can just switch to Merciful Mode whenever you want. Unless you want to start the game at level 255 for whatever reason, then I see no point to this DLC. The final DLC offered is the Shin Megami Tensei BGM pack. With this, you can change the music that plays in the overworld along with the battle themes. These songs are from SMT 1, 2, 4, and 4 Apocalypse. This DLC really isn't necessary, and in all honesty, should have been packed in with the base game. Even with the DLC included, I have a hard time justifying this remaster's current price point of $50, let alone $70 they think it's worth with all the add-ons. I don't think that Nocturne HD is a terrible game. It's based off of the foundation of one of my favorite JRPGs of all time after all. I had a great time revisiting this game and I actually ended up finishing it, not just for the sake of this review, but because I legitimately love this game. However, did my enjoyment come from my admiration of the base game, or was it because of the quality of this remaster? And that answer is pretty obvious in my eyes. My biggest issue with Nocturne HD is the price point. You can buy the original game off Amazon for around $20 if you look in the right places. You can even get the game digitally for $10 on the PS3 store if you still have access to that. So the question can be boiled down to this. Do you think that widescreen support, the new lighting engine, voice acting, difficulty selection, and trophies are worth the $40 extra that this version asks for? Potentially more if we include the Dante DLC? In my opinion, I don't think so. The price should be $30 for the base game, maybe $40 if we include Dante. I really hope Atlus doesn't look at the sales of this game to determine the future of SMT remasters. There's a lot of games in this series that deserve another shot now that the brand is more recognizable. If people don't pick up this game and it gets poor sales, that isn't because people don't have an interest in mainline SMT, it would be because we got a half-hearted port that was sold at a premium price. I would love to see remasters of games such as Digital Devil Saga and the Raido games, but only if Atlus is able to learn from the mistakes made here. Like I said, I don't think that this is a terrible remaster, but I can't recommend it at its current price in good faith, and that's why this situation is so disappointing to me. Nocturne is a fantastic game, and the remaster is worth it, only if you can find it at a good price. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of my patrons whose names are on screen now. If you'd like to support my channel and receive some pretty cool perks, then you should check out my Patreon in the description. So, quick update on the Persona 5 video. It's still happening, don't worry about that. I know I said it would be next after the Persona Q video, but this one's shaping up to be a very long project. I'm still writing the script for that video, and I've made some good progress so far. Still not sure when the video will be finished, but I want to have it done by the end of June at the latest. You can get updates on that video by following my Twitter or joining my Discord server. Both links will be in the description. I've also been thinking about starting channel memberships as an alternative to Patreon. I've had a few people tell me that they'd want to support me through that method, but I want to look more into it and make sure I can give the same rewards here as I do on my Patreon. We'll cross that road when we get to it, however. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and take care!